It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, which who really probably needs no introduction.
Sure.
I expect most of you have known Ray for quite some time. Some of you have had him in class. Ray Weil joined the University of Maryland back in 1979 after completing his PhD at Virginia Tech and doing a stint in the Peace Corps. And he's been here since that time, but he does a lot of traveling. He has spent a lot of time over the years in developing countries, particularly in Africa. And in terms of classes, he teaches, of course, the intro soils class for us, but he also teaches classes in soil fertility and sustainable agriculture. He established, first developed those sustainable agriculture courses back here at the University of Maryland when a lot of people didn't think we need such courses. But being the forward-looking individual that he is, he forged ahead. And he's also well known as one of the real champions of cover crops as a strategy for this area for keeping nitrogen out of the Chesapeake Bay. As I tell people, I feel it to be an honor to be a colleague of Ray Weil, because he's been doing lots of great things, not only locally, but also around the world. And most recently, he spent some time this past summer in Uganda. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about that work this morning. So, Ray, welcome.
Thank you, Marty. It's an honor to be your colleague as well. One of the best known wetland soil scientists and pathologists in the world. So we're lucky here in ENST at the University of Maryland. Yeah, you remind me, I could go on about that sustainable agriculture course. I wasn't allowed to call it that originally, so times have changed, fortunately. Over the long haul, it always looks like things are getting worse, but when you take a longer view, actually, I think things are getting better. So I'm going to see if this remote control works. It might not. I'm going to try. So I think Anne might be listening on Zoom, but she sent out a message that she got that the Farmer to Farmer program was looking for some volunteers. This is a U.S. aid program, United States Agency for International Development, which aims to link up farmers and experts in the U.S. to work directly with farmers, primarily in developing countries around the world. Many of their countries that they work with are in Africa, and the USAID no longer works directly on this sort of stuff. Like much of the federal government has been hollowed out. Those of you that are familiar with the EPA know that they don't do much of their own analyses and have many of their own scientists either. So AID likewise contracts out to non-government organizations, what we call nonprofits, the rest of the world calls non-government organizations, NGOs. And the one that was organizing and recruiting for this is Catholic Relief Services. Marty knows I'm not a Catholic, but that doesn't, they don't discriminate on that basis. And I said, yeah, sure. This was the assignment that, this is not going to work, huh? Okay, so we'll do this. If this works. It's not going to work either. There we go. So the assignment was basically, it involved climate smart agriculture. I was supposed to do some training of farmers on sustainable resource management. That sounded like what I did, and especially for oilseed crops in the Lira region of Uganda. They want someone to come in March and April. I think I heard about this in either early March, late February, a few weeks ahead of time when they wanted it. And I would have gone because I don't teach in spring semester, but I wanted to be there. I told them, there's no sense in me going there. I asked them, when are you planting? And they said, oh, we don't plant until May. Well, there's no point in me going when there's nothing growing in the field, because then I have no plans to tell me what's going on below ground. So we put it off until June when the crops would be up. And that was the time when they could meet with me. And so of course I didn't know where Lira was. I know where Uganda is. I've worked in Uganda before, but Lira is about there. And this is a political map of the countries in Africa, and there's Uganda. Lira is in northern Uganda, not the part that most people are familiar with. And looking at the rainfall of the continent, it's a pretty well-watered area, but remember that this about 1,000 millimeters of rain. So similar to what we get in Maryland, but they get it all in about 6 months. So they have a long dry season, which is typical of most of the continent, except for this rainforest area in the middle, which is wet most of the time. And then, of course, the next question is what kind of soils, and you can't go to Web Soil Survey to find out what kind of soils are in Lira. So, but you can go to ISRIC, which is operated out of Wageningen University. I think I pronounced that right because my major professor years ago at Virginia Tech was Wiebe Kronchi. He was a Dutchman, and he was trained at Wageningen. So it's one of the leading soil centers in the world. I believe we actually have a soil profile of a Beltsville silt loam sitting in the Soil Museum in Wageningen. I believe Del Fanning packed that up many, many years ago when they requested it. So here's a soil grids map of Africa, a general sort of soil order level. These are the world reference-based groups. And you can see it's mostly, take a closer look here. It's mostly the dark orange are what we would call mostly oxasols and ultrasols, depending on how you define it. And the lighter yellow here come out as canvasols, which are pretty close to our inceptisols, though some of them might have there might be a sandy alpha sol. And then scattered around towards Sudan, there's a lot of purple. That's the vertisols. So this is the main area of vertisols probably in the world, but there are some vertisols scattered around here, usually in the low parts of the landscape. So this is zooming in a little bit. Google Earth is great. You can kind of visit a place before you go there and get some information. I guess it makes it a little less of an adventure, but otherwise does give you some information. So one thing you can see immediately is that from the bare fields, these little checkerboard things are hand cultivated fields, and they're pretty red soils in here in the uplands. So that's quite different from where the waterways are. These are not necessarily streams. They're sometimes marshes, wetlands, and that's where the vertisols usually would be found if they're going to be vertisols there. Another thing I noticed were these long, narrow fields, kind of long and narrow like that. Does anybody know what that indicates? You really see that. Go to Google Earth and look at Holland, Netherlands, or northern Belgium, and you'll see lots of very long, narrow fields. Does anybody know what does that indicate to you guys? Put yourself in a village agriculture situation. And these fields are a couple of acres in size.
Are they from animals plowing the fields, or?
Yeah. It indicates animal traction. So these, in really poor areas in many parts of Africa, the fields are square because people are hand hoeing, and they'll be sort of odd shapes, sort of square. But when you're working with animals, it's a real pain to turn these animals around at the end of a row. And so everywhere in the world that does animal traction, and in Holland, these fields must have been divided up, who knows, in the Middle Ages or something, I'm not sure when, but they're still there, even though they're not using animals anymore. These long, little narrow fields, even more striking than here. You can see this pattern over the whole landscape, just to move on. Then a really important ingredient is who you're working with. I mean, I'm just a stranger parachuting in, and that works to some degree. Catholic Relief Services had a nice office right across the street from the U.S. Embassy in Kampala, and all the traffic in Kampala is just a bustling, cacophonous city with tons of traffic, and the U.S. Embassy looks like it's like, I don't know, Fort Embassy with barbed wire and tall fences, and right across the street from that, an easy stroll is the Catholic Relief Services offices, and they do all the paperwork and count the beans and all that kind of stuff. But they subcontracted with this little local NGO up in Lira, it's called Global Forum for Development, or GLOFORD, and it's run by this fellow Morris Ongum. And Morris was a local boy, made good, successful businessman, grew up in Lira and went to the schools. They actually taught in one of the schools there. I noticed from Google Maps that there was a Lira Agricultural College. Well, sort of, but that's what the map said. And he had actually gone to school there years ago. So I did visit that place eventually. But he was dedicated. He had come back to give back. And he was really connected, and he hired his staff from the villages that he was working with. So he worked some in the city, mostly on women's rights and reproductive rights and sexual harassment and things like that in the city, big issue. And then in the countrysides, he had programs on microloans where people would get together, pool their money and make little microloans. So these are business loans of $20, $50, maybe $100 would be a lot, just, to get farmers through or start a little business. And then a local business that he was trying to promote was working with local industry to press cooking oil. So cooking oil is used, if you've ever eaten African food, they love to use a lot of oil in it. And a lot of this is locally made, some of it's imported, but it's very simple to make oil. You can use a machine to squeeze seeds and the oil comes out if you have an oily seed. So two major oil seeds are soybeans and sunflowers. They also talked about sesame, but I never found any sesame there. So he was great to work with, and he followed through, and the people he hired were from the village, and I think that made a huge difference. So when you get in a new place like this is the town of Lyra. It's a small city. This is the main street, so you can see it's kind of paved, I guess. It has buildings of various sorts. The first thing I wanted to do is explore and see what kind of resources were there, both for me. I had to buy a shovel for one thing, and can't go out in the field with a shovel. And it's a little hard to take that on the plane. That TSA took away my knife. I had a little sharp knife, and I forgot that it was in my carry-on, so that got taken away. That actually played a role. That was one thing leads to another. So let's drop down in Lyra, the main street. We're going to go looking for agro dealers, which is what we would call a farm supply shop, to see what is available to farmers in the way of fertilizers and seeds and pesticides and that kind of thing, and just what's going on. So I visited several of them. This was by far owned by the most knowledgeable. So here's the street saying, is there volume on this? No. How do we turn the sound on? Maybe it's here someplace. Well, I wanted to hear, it's okay without the sound, but I wanted to hear that I was greeting people so not in Uganda, that's what they speak in Kampala. So the people up here can't talk to the people in Uganda, in Kampala, the capital. The people up here speak Virungu or something like that. But I learned a few greetings and things like that. And I was talking to people when I walked in. So sorry you couldn't hear the sound. I thought I sounded pretty authentic. You couldn't tell. I couldn't tell which was my voice and which was the people saying hi to me. So this is Grace anyway. And this was not only the owner of the shop, but I talked to her a little bit. And she also owned a farm, quite a large commercial farm, which is unusual in this area. But she knew about farming. She knew about her products. She told me about the different varieties of seeds, including DeKalb. So DeKalb had seeds there. No GMOs. GMOs are not, actually, we've discussed this quite extensively in our sustainable ag class. Most African countries do not allow any GMOs, and that's this is sort of post-colonial European influence, because most European countries also don't allow it. And that's an interesting issue for another seminar. But she was very knowledgeable about all these products, and she was a farmer herself. And so we had a good discussion. Oh, by the way, the war in Ukraine had really crimped her supply of fertilizer. There was no fertilizer available except some little bottles of really high-priced micronutrient sprays for vegetables. So farmers were not, it really wasn't available for farmers of her scale, but that didn't matter much. Once I got out to the village, they had no fertilizer or money for fertilizer anyway. So the second step, after exploring the town quite a bit and seeing what the facilities, I did that on the first day, bought some mud boots, gum boots, they call them, things like that. And also some jerry cans and a watering can. I had some ideas what I might use that for, but I really didn't know. Catholic Relief Services actually wanted me to send them my handouts. They said they would print the handouts for me for my training. I said, well, I can't give you a handout. I have no idea what I'm going to do the training on. I haven't been there. I don't know what the problems are. I don't know how well they're doing, how poorly they're doing. So I said, let's just, I'll work in the field. We'll work with the farmers in the field, and then eventually we'll figure out what we're going to do the training on. So the project was on training, and AID counts beans. How many farmers of what gender did you train, went through this program? So the second thing was to visit farmers in their field. So the young man from, see in this picture? No. From Glowford drove me out to the field in a rather rickety four-wheel drive, but it did work. And we got out, and he was actually from one of these villages, so he had grown up there. And so it was, they already had groups organized for this microloan program, so they kind of called the group together, and we went out and spent a lot of time walking through the different fields. So this is a soybean field. has a couple of corn plants here and there, so most Africans don't plant pure crops. If corn comes up in your soybean field, you'll harvest the corn cob if you get one or two. That's food. But the soybeans, this is actually one of the better soybean fields. Pretty low populations, a lot of things like that, but not doing too badly, not severely nutrient deficient like I might have expected. So there we go. This is one of the slogans, by the way: sleep under a mosquito net every night. Very effective way to control malaria, because the Anopheles mosquito bites at night. So if you sleep under the net, you're usually much safer. This woman played a role in this, woman in the polka dot. So we went to a lot of different fields. The other main crop that I was supposed to work with was sunflower, and so chose the right time. Sunflowers were growing in just about the right stage to see how well they're doing. Beautiful crop. And then of course the shovel came in handy, even though it was kind of a cheap Chinese shovel. And there's this woman again. We walked over miles and miles. It was hot. I was sweating, and it was really hot, and we're going, and she's rolling along with us. Well, she's pretty pregnant, and she was just getting worn out. She just, you can just, she looks, I really felt sorry for her. I said, you don't have, she wanted to, she didn't want to miss any of this. So she spent the whole day walking around with me. And we saw some diseases there. And so that's her again. So I needed a knife. And then I realized I don't have my little pocket knife to slice open the stem to see if it looked like a bacterial wilt of sunflower. And I wanted to slice open the stem. So can anybody get me a knife? And that's where Rebecca came in. Nyaka Rebecca. So they switched the name. She's Rebecca, but they use it second, but it's her first name and their given name. And she was a young girl, and she ran and got a kind of a homemade kitchen knife, but it had been sharpened. It did the job. You can see, and yes, it was bacterial wilt. That's kind of what I was looking for, but it wasn't a severe infection. So Rebecca's standing here in front of her house. And I took her picture, a couple of pictures of her, and she's drawing leaves. This is a legume that grows as an understory in some of their cornfields, and she's drawing this as a vegetable. She's going to mix it in with the rice and beans, not the rice, the maize and beans, and use this as a vegetable and dry it. So that's how they preserve it. I also like to call your attention to the plastic jerry can. Lots of plastic jerry cans available for next to nothing. They buy them used, after whatever came in them, and people sell them on the street used. So they're in the village. So that actually plays a role. And then while we're talking about it, you might look at the soil decoration here of different colors of soils that they use to decorate their homes. And homes themselves are made of soil. So this is an earthen home with a grass roof. Well, it turns out Rebecca has a dream. She wants to be a tailor. This is a picture I took in another country of typical tailors out in front of the shop you see in all the small towns. So there's tailors everywhere. They repair clothing, they make clothing to order. An old treadle type sewing machine, so they're not dependent on electricity. And that's what she really wanted to do. I think she was about 16. I never really got her age. Unfortunately, she had just been orphaned. Both of her parents had died a few months before. She had really no resources at all and no future. She kind of inherited the plot of land assigned to them, so she wasn't going to starve, but her dream wasn't going to make it. But we had a conversation, and she was helpful, and I thought maybe I could do something about that. So we did a lot of digging, of course. I'm sort of a plant soil person, looking at the relationship, so I'm interested in what's going on above and below ground. And pretty soon I uncovered a problem that I hadn't realized I was going to run into here. It's not a fertility problem, didn't need any fertilizers, but when I dug up soybean plants and sunflower plants in just about all of these fields, I found something like this. The roots would grow, they'd hit this hard layer, and they'd start splaying out horizontally. You can kind of see all these roots growing horizontally. And then a few would make it through, and they'd get down to this deeper layer and splay out again, and then hardly any roots would go below that. So that's a real problem. You're talking about an area with a fair amount of rain, but often it'll go for a few weeks without rain. It was actually pretty dry when I took these pictures. And, plants need to have a big volume of soil to be able to get water and nutrients from. So this, I think, was a limiting problem. And as I explained to the villagers, it's really like growing plants in a pot. Do you want growing a big plant in a little pot, or do you want to have a big plot with a large supply of water there? And so that, maybe wonder, what's causing this? What's causing these layers that are root, stopping layers, root penetration resistance? And so I said, how do you kill weeds? And this was actually very unusual. They used this straight hoe. I don't think I've ever seen this before. And I've been in a lot of African villages, and hoes are used all over the world, and they've sort of evolved by people, and they're usually pretty similar. The blade is usually at a right angle, so you can swing it, right? But not these folks. Up here in northern Uganda, they used a straight hoe. I tried it. To me, it seemed awkward, but for them, it was second nature to kill weeds this way. Well, how do you use this? Now, this is on a dry day. You can see by the dust, but imagine this happening when the plants were little, when they actually did the weeding, when it had just rained. Now, the hoe goes an inch or two deep, couple of inches deep, and then just smears. So these are soils that are, these were sandy loams with about probably 20–25% clay in them, enough to really set up a nice, well, not nice, but a serious pan of smeared, compacted soil from that weeding operation. I think that's what caused the first layer. So this is how they do their weeding. And then, of course, I had to figure out what was that second layer from. Now, this is Boni. Boni is his given name. And I've kept in touch with him. He went to most of the villages with me. He was an employee of that NGO, Gloford, and he grew up in a similar village nearby. A very nice young man, just recently married. And he was not an agriculturalist, but of course he'd grown up farming in this small scale and was really interested in everything we were talking about. And so really helped me, do the lessons and communicate with the people. So again, you can't hear what's going on, but I asked them, does somebody have the plow that you can show me? What did you do in the beginning of the season before you planted? And there is the plow. They brought their plow out, and there's the villain. Now, if you go out to the foyer, some of you must have walked by it 100 times. There's a green painted, very similar implement that's used all over the world. The frame is the same, but this part is different on that one. This is the yoke, by the way. 2 oxen will be tied up to this, one here and one there. It's turned this way, and they'll pull this plow. So this is way better than hand hoeing. These people, have the advantage of having this animal traction. And this is a colonial introduction from the British. Probably this type of plow is used pretty much all over the world. I'm not sure where this one was manufactured. It looks like it's been repaired a lot. But the way this works is this plowshare slices through the soil. We have a term called the furrow slice. It's one of those terms that used to be in the textbook before I took it over a lot. I've kept it in a few places because we used to think in terms of that slice of soil that we sliced off and turned around. And as we slice through this, as if it were almost like a fluid, all in one sort of piece, the soil comes up against this mold board, which then flips it over. So the plow is picking up the soil from the top. In this case, it probably goes about 5 or 6 inches deep. It's picking up the soil and flipping it over. And of course, if you're picking up the soil, and I asked the women, I said, when you pick up that heavy load of grain and put it on your head, what are your feet doing? Oh, they're pressing down. Yeah, that's what the plow is doing. Because of that upward movement, the plow is pressing down and smearing and causing a lot of compaction. Moldboard plows are like maybe the worst implement ever invented. And they're still used all over the world. Just Google plowing video and you'll see all these European plows with big, huge modern tractors plowing up. I've shown this to my sustainable ag field, and they're very proud of these because they wouldn't put video of them online. And what they're doing to some of those hillsides in Hungary and Czechoslovakia and France is just amazing. So that's kind of the problem. And like you say, this is a very typical plow. So much emblem of agriculture was it Norman Rockwell. This is a Norman Rockwell painting. Some of you, if you're kind of old school artists, know that Norman Rockwell was an American artist who painted sort of the very traditional Thanksgiving dinners, and he used to do calendars and covers of magazines and stuff. Well, when the Peace Corps was founded by President Kennedy in the 1960s, I joined about 7 years after it was founded, or 6 years. I was not when I was in high school when it was founded. But this is a young American Peace Corps volunteer teaching Ethiopian farmers with some oxen how to adjust this American moldboard plow. In the background, over here behind this guy, is the Ethiopian's traditional plow, which does much less compaction. It's also much less effective. But so here you can see the kind of furrow slice compaction that's caused by this plow in a wet soil. This picture was in Chad. This is in Mexico, among the Tarahumara Indians, where I've worked in southern Mexico. Same thing, different animals pulling the plow. This is in Tanzania, same sort of plow. And this is in the US. Picture obviously wasn't taken in 1880, but this is the type of plow that American farmers, John Deere developed an example of, the steel plow, and was used up until the time tractors were introduced in the 1920s and 30s, and it's still in use. This picture actually is a horse. We still have a few animal traction farms by choice, not by necessity. And so it does the same thing wherever you use it. So that day, at the end of the day, we're headed back and we get to the main road, which is a dirt road going towards the city. And just by serendipity, I see this little sign, side of the road, and it says it's the Nero Research Station. Nero is National Agricultural Research Organization. So this is essentially like a USDA research station right outside of Lyra. And well, it was getting kind of late. Everyone wanted to get home for dinner. I said, let's just stop in. We're here. Let's stop in, see if anybody's around. And there were some people still there. I thought maybe they would have a laboratory and they could do some analyses there, you know. So we were collecting soil samples in all these fields, and I had a pH meter and an EC meter with me, but there's only so much you can do with that. Although that is, the EC, we can talk about that. That actually is a very indicative thing to measure in a non-saline sort of area. Well, the laboratory, this is kind of typical that you see in these kind of situations. The laboratory was there. It was very nice and clean and neat. So it was you know, in good shape, but it had been pretty much given over to the production of shea butter products. So they grew shea butter, nuts, and they were making products, you know, value-added products like shampoo, and these are bars of soap, which are then cut up and stuff. And they were making this stuff and selling it, you know, probably to supplement their meager salaries. And that was what the lab was doing. That was all that was going on. No, there was no soil. I talked about it, but when I got right down to it, no, there was really no soil analysis. They talked about, oh, farmers could send their sample in. I said, really? Oh, where would you analyze it? And, you know, so really there was no soil analysis going on there or plant analysis. They were making shea butter products. But I did run into an agronomist who was just packing up to go home. And I told him about the plow pans and the kind of plow. He said, oh, you know, there was a project here. Some international NGO brought us a chisel plow. And, you know, for that problem. And we did some research here and it worked pretty well. You still have that? Oh, yeah, it's in. So we went out to the warehouse on the other side of the research farm and he found the guy with the key and we opened it up. And there were 4 or 5 of these plows in there. And we pulled one out. So this is the village plow, the moldboard plow. And sort of an interim solution, first step along this path might be to replace it with a chisel plow. So you don't have to buy the whole thing. Villages, you know, this is the same frame. You're just replacing the moldboard part with this part. So this should be fairly easy to manufacture locally. I'm not sure where this was made, but he had 4 or 5 of them. And they said, yeah, you guys could borrow them. And if your village farmers want to try that. So we got the village farmers, we got volunteers, we got, you know, 5 farmers that are going to try this next year when they're preparing their soils and see how that works. So that was just pure serendipity that I ran into these things sitting in an old warehouse. And then we did run into some soil fertility problems. So soil fertility is kind of my specialty. So I'm always on the lookout for that. And, you know, a plant like that speaks to me as I drive by, you know, oh, really? You know, wait, stop. And so this was a good example of how poor soils make poor people. And the reverse is also true. Poor people make poor soils. You know, you just can't afford to do it. And this was the farmer of this land, and he was poor, and he was hungry, and he was ragged. And basically, you know, Dave works with phosphorus a lot, but usually your problem is too much phosphorus here in Maryland, right? It's like calories. Usually our problem is too many calories, right? But in this environment, calories are a good thing, protein is a good thing, and phosphorus is a good thing, and you wish you had more of it. So first of all, these are typical, dare I say, textbook examples of phosphorus deficient corn plants with these purple leaves, and they're stunted. Population is way too low, but that's because the seed is expensive. And just as a quick aside, this has fooled farmers all over the world for a long, long time. Is if you want to grow a big, beautiful ear of corn or a big, beautiful radish or whatever it is, you plant them far apart, right? And then the resulting plant has a lot of room and it's big and beautiful. And you know, if you crowd them together, they're all kind of wimpy. But the math works out that if you crowd them together, you get a lot more per area of land. We had a visitor that was visiting from Uganda, just a quick, I think like the week I got back, we had Dave Tilley called me up. Would I meet with Grace, different Grace from Uganda? And she was doing some farming as well as some other enterprises having to do with methane generation. So she was connected with Dr. Lansing also. And she said, yeah, she took a little drive around. I was showing her pictures from Uganda and some of my research here. I didn't get a chance to take her to the farm. She just took one little drive around Maryland. She saw you crowd your corn plants up. So this was in the middle of summer. So the corn plants were big. It was in July. You crowd them up so much. Is that really, I said, yeah, it's really something you need to do. Otherwise, all the sunlight's hitting the soil and it's just killing soil organisms, baking the soil and using up water and not producing anything. So that was a problem throughout the farming area. And the other thing in this, these chunks of what look like rock, but they're actually, and some of them are gravel, it's actually what used to be called laterite. It's hardened plinthite. So this is an iron kind of a stone concretions that form probably at another age with a fluctuating water table. I don't think there was any water table near here now, but these are the worst soils in this kind of environment. If you find plinthite on the surface like that, hardened plinthite, that's usually very bad news. There are often layers of it down below, which are root restricting. Plus, that's really a sign of high phosphorus fixation with iron. So there were some really bad situations, but the village I was working with, the nutrients weren't too bad, but there were a lot of variation. So in this case, I was out in a field, and here are these soybean plants, and they're pretty small and wimpy, and again, lots and lots of space where the sun's just growing weeds and using up water. But in the background, I didn't take this picture, so it may not be the best. I'm going to try to. The folks watching this on Zoom don't see that, but that was a little trick the student taught me in class. You can get rid of that thing. So the background is this tree. And the trees in this was all forested at one time. So this is now called a cultivation savanna. So it's the savanna part is the crops, and then you have scattered trees. And so most fields will have a tree or two in them. And we went under this tree. They were saying how poor the soil was and how poor the crop was. And then I went back in here, and you can see this much greener, taller plants. It was just a different world under that tree. What was the name of that tree? I didn't recognize it. I should have. I didn't recognize it. Oh, it's the olam tree. So try looking up what an olam tree is. This is not Swahili or a common language. This is like Uganda, the language up there. But I eventually figured out what it was. It's a ficus tree. It's the Ficus sycamoris, and found a bunch of other ones. But under this tree, the soil was much darker. Within the branch extent around the tree. That tree had been growing and pumping nutrients up and dropping leaves, for probably a century or more, that particular tree. And it enriched the soil, not only visibly in organic matter, but also in nutrients. This is one of the sort of agroforestry principles, is you can combine crops with trees in situations like this. So, that's my hand. That's a farmer's name was, he had a Bible, I think his name was Bible. It was an interesting name, yeah. And he seemed to know a lot about farming. I think he's in one of these pictures. May go back. He's the guy in the orange shirt here. And he understood an awful lot. And I found out later that he was a teacher. And he was kind of a science teacher in a high school someplace, you know, in some simple school. But he was great to have. This is how the plants responded. So this is an individual soybean plant. They're all far apart, but this is the potential under the tree. And this is look at the difference in yield. I mean, yeah, this if you have enough of these, you'll actually get a pretty substantial yield. So another little serendipity was before I left Kampala, I knew that in Kampala was a very famous university, or at least a famous soil science department in Makerere University, one of the best soil science departments in Africa by reputation. And I knew that they had a soil test kit that they had developed, and I actually stopped by, and everywhere was busy. There was a conference going on, but I did manage to get one of the soil test kits. And some of you may have heard of the Bray extraction and stannous chloride method of reducing phosphorus for analysis. Well, they don't use stannous chloride, they use tin. So in this little envelope here looked like aluminum foil, but it was actually genuine tin. We use the word tin very sloppily, like tin can and tin foil, but this was actually tin foil, which is probably where the word came from. And you just rubbed it on the inside of the tube to get the necessary tin, and then you got this blue color. This was away from the tree where that little soybean plant was growing. This was under the tree where the big soybean plant was. So a lot of that was phosphorus, but I suspect other nutrients like sulfur as well. Nitrogen shouldn't have been a problem. The soybeans were nodulated, so it shouldn't have been a problem. And that field with the poor farmer with the rags, and they really didn't form any color at all that you can measure. Really, really low, like no phosphorus there. So that was undoubtedly the limiting factor. Now notice the tortured tree. All these trees are not beautiful specimens spreading out. They're all chopped because firewood, you got to cook. And it's either chop the tree in your field, you don't want to kill it, but you keep chopping branches off, or it's walk another couple of miles to where there's some more trees, and then you have to bring it back like 100 pounds on your head. And, you know, that's what they're going to do. So where are they going to get the phosphorus to improve their production? Agroforestry would be great in a more systematic way. And there are actually trees that are at least as good or better than that. But, you know, we all have phosphorus and we all have it and we excrete it, and almost nobody uses it. This is becoming a thing in certain areas, but I've been kind of pushing this for a long time. And so I went back to the hotel and I had a couple of little water bottles. They didn't have big ones. So I collected my urine and I brought it out to the field so I could do a demonstration. So that was what the watering can was. And we're in a millet field, which is human food. And there's a stake marking off. We had 4 of these marking off a couple of plots. And we watered several of these plots with diluted urine. The key is you have to dilute the urine. Everybody knows when you ask, why don't you use urine? You know, first of all, they don't know urine has nutrients in it. But they've all peed on a plant and killed it at some point in their young life, right? At least the men have, right? and so they said, well, no, but no, you have to dilute it. It's too salty. It's too strong. So we did a little experiment, and Boney tells me that he went back out after I left, and that that you could visually see that the millet was growing much better, and everybody is collecting their urine now. Well, if you only have an acre or 2 of crops, if you do the math and everybody produces about 1 liter a day, and you can actually make a significant difference there. A little bit goes a long way. One other little thing that I've done over the years is, you visit people and you don't want to feel like it's going to the zoo. You're interested in taking pictures, and I take pictures so I can get seminars, classroom records of it, and a lot of things. But you also want to give back, and so I find somebody in the town, some little hole in the wall shop where somebody's got a printer, and print out some of the pictures that I've taken, and then you have to remember to laminate them. A piece of paper with a color picture in the village will last about 10 minutes, especially in the rainy season. So we'll laminate them, and man, most of these people have never seen a picture of themselves or their friends and their relatives. Put a hole in it so they can hang it on the wall. And so I come back to the village with a lot of those. That's actually Rebecca. This is a woman in the village, looking at her. Oh, yeah, it does look like him. It's kind of a new experience. So they really appreciate that. So after I visited all these fields and figured out what some of the problems were that we could talk about, then we had these formal lessons where you could count the number of people and that kind of stuff. There were forms they had to fill out. And I actually have a picture of the form. I didn't include it. But it included your name and did all this stuff and gender. So AID needed to know the gender, and they had more than 2 columns, put it this way. Now in Uganda, if you had checked off the 3rd column, you could be arrested. It was illegal. So yeah, you sometimes wonder about that. But anyways, this is he's looking at his group. He's in the group picture. So I had a bunch of demonstrations and soil samples and stuff, and these were just great students. Half of them could understand everything I was saying because they can't talk to the people in Kampala. So for trade, they learn English is the common language, which is true in many countries that England has been, colonized. That they got so many different languages that the common language is English. But Bonnie here in the chair also translated what I was talking about. So it was just great to hear their questions because they had really no conception of nutrients. It's a little bit like talking about disease to people that didn't know what a bacteria was. So you were talking about nutrients and how when the women brought that wood in from the field, and when they bring the crops in, they take the whole bean crops into the village and then they thresh it there. And they sell the beans, and then they sweep away or burn the residue. And they do that every year. And, they have no idea. They're taking all the nutrients out of the field and bring them to the village. And so if you measure the EC of the soils right around the village, it's quite high. A couple hundred parts per million, because it has a lot of nutrients in solution. But if you go just 100 meters out, it's really, really low. So EC is kind of a general measure of fertility there. So this is just one of the setups I have. Some of you will recognize sort of the slaking, aggregate stability, little pH meter and stuff like this. There's the same woman there, the pregnant woman. Well, she asked me after we're talking, I had this lesson and was explaining about the nutrients, was also explaining about the light and the soil. And the way I put it, they're very, very religious people. These are Christian, I think you could say they're evangelical Christians, just very religious. So I put it, God gives you this gift of sunlight, and what's happening to most of it? It's just hitting bare soil. It's as if you had a guest and you prepare a great dinner for them and they just take one bite and throw the rest away. What kind of thanks is that? So you really need to have those plants so that when they're full size, all the sun falls on a leaf. Otherwise, you're throwing away a gift. So she said, "What's your wife's name?" Patricia. If she has a baby girl, she wants to name it after my wife. She said, if it's a baby boy, she wants to name it. What's your name? Raymond does. So there's either a Patricia or a Raymond out there someplace. And I was just floored by that. And then Morris followed through. I had the sort of closing meeting with him, and I told him about Rebecca. I said, there's this young girl who's orphaned. She wants to be a tailor. I know there's no, she can't learn that trade around there, but they have these trade schools where they can board it. And he found a trade school near Lyra where she couldn't walk, or there was no transportation, nowhere to get to it. She has to board it. And he got her enrolled, and I said, I'd pay for it. And it was 1,152,000 Uganda shillings. That's the total when you added up the room and the board and the fees. And she needed to bring with her, you can't read some of this stuff, but you can get this. She had to bring 60 kilograms of beans and 80 kilograms of maize. That's a lot. That's to support, that's what she's going to eat for the whole year. Right. And hard broom, a soft broom, a scrub brush. You kind of get the idea. They're going to do a lot of cleaning and do their own cooking. They're not going to go to a cafeteria and get served meals. It's a pretty simple school. It's called Truth Vocational and Technical Institute. Well, the 1.2 million shillings turns out to be $302 US, which I gladly sent them by an app called World Remit. I had to send another $50 or $100 for material so she could make stuff. And that's the same Rebecca, just totally bewildered. It's probably the first time she's ever been out of that village. She's in Glowford's office there. He's interviewing her. And then he took her to the school. And she's just totally bewildered. But she wants to do this. So he sent me these pictures. And this is her sewing, learning the class. Damn, she made a dress. And look at the expression. I mean, just, just about made me want to cry when he sent me this stuff on WhatsApp. I wake up in the middle of the night, a WhatsApp message comes in. And how great is that? So, and then I got this just a week ago. This is from Boney, the guy that was taking me around. Let me enlarge that and let you read it. He sent me this picture. It's not the best picture in the world, but this is Boney. This is our sort of lecture in the village. So I think I was just floored. So it was a boy. They decided they would name it after me. Only Ray. So I think that, so I take away that, if not the opportunity knocks on your door and you can possibly do something, and even if you don't know what you're getting into, I think yes is usually the answer that you want to try for. So thanks for listening, and I guess we're going to have a minute or two for any questions you might have.
You do have time for a few questions, depending on questions, right?
Yeah.
So Ray, I'm interested in knowledge and technology transfer.
Yeah.
And regarding the plow, that chiseled plow was sitting there.
Yeah.
So what was there a story behind that? Why are they still using the old method?
Oh, that's what they use everywhere. The chisel plow was an introduction there was a project, some internationally funded project, and they did some plots on it and research on it, and yeah, it worked pretty well. And there was actually one farmer, the same guy, Bible, the teacher, because he was a teacher, he had used it. He had used it once while there was a project. I guess they probably loaned it to him or paid him to do it or something like that. Yeah. And then what usually happens with projects is why I was emphasizing Morris and this follow through. Usually you come in, you do your thing, it's all over. People go back and do what they were doing before. Yeah.
So at least that plow was going to be substantially bigger.
Well, it would be, I don't know how it would work out. I mean, but there were a number of farmers willing to try it. It's an implement closer to the one out in the hall is actually for weeding. It's not, this is for primary tillage to break up that plow pan. And it doesn't plow the whole surface. And I really, of course, they should be doing some version of no-till, but you have almost zero money. If it involved buying a whole plow, I don't think anybody could do it, but it just involves the piece that you bolt onto the plow. So that's not too expensive.
Stephanie Lansing has a question. Stephanie, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
All right. Sorry I couldn't be there, Ray, but this is, as always, just a wonderful, fascinating presentation, and your work is just so amazing. I just wanted to ask a question. So, for those of you who haven't done Peace Corps or don't have kind of the if you're a young professor or you're a graduate student, and I know you've gotten grants from USAID and you may be through Catholic Charities, but how would you advise, whether it's undergrads, graduate students, or faculty to kind of get involved in international work? Because obviously someone's, you have a trip, you have expenses while you're there. So how do you go about kind of starting that process out?
Wow. It kind of depends on what you want to do. If you've got a scientific question that would benefit from, field sites in other countries, that's not a development issue. That's a science project. NSF and other agencies sponsor, even USDA sponsor research with foreign sites. So you can write the grant in such a way that you would do the research and then you might have several sites. That's might have been where those plows were tested. I doubt that they were from the US. They're probably from a European country. Peace Corps, of course, is a great way to start getting involved and see whether you want to continue to be involved or not. It's not for everybody. And then there are opportunities to come up. We have our international office does a good job of passing things on. It's a matter of saying yes and finding the time. So I was lucky I wasn't teaching. It ended up being in summer, so I could have gone anyway. But yeah.
I'll ask Captain Wood. Talk about what, to me, strikes me as just the terror of going to a place and working with people that have so little, possibly needs, or not being able to comfort them for them in the way that you want. The what's that? You've gotten used to that, but talk about that.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a time, and
Yeah.
has there been a time where it didn't work out?
Yeah, I think I know what you hate to make a mistake on something that would be sort of life or death for people on their livelihood. So, and that's one reason why progress is difficult in this kind of situation, because they really can't afford to take chances, because they're not growing food to increase their income a little bit. That's what they're going to eat. Their family's going to eat. If it's a failure, they're going to really be hungry. Along a similar line, I agonized when I was getting ready to join the Peace Corps about how much you want to change people in their own society, living their own way. Because Peace Corps kind of thinks of themselves as change agents, and what business do we have trying to make change in another society? So I understand the angst about that. It really depends on the society you're in as to how much they're looking for change and how much they're interested in welcoming outsiders. Sometimes you can contribute things that would happen here too, is just a fresh pair of eyes. People don't see what they're doing every day and why they're doing it every day. We don't either. A lot of crazy things, if you visit the US from another country, you go, why in the heck do do you do this? There's lots of things like that as a visitor you can contribute that that aren't risky. But I understand what you're saying. You don't want to do something too risky. You'd like to start it in a small way, right?
But you push, I guess you push past that, and to have a fighting chance of making a contribution.
Yeah.
Is it really? You really just need to know what's in nature and property soils. What do you need to know?
Oh gosh, well, some of that stuff, the basic science, one of the great gratifications, you see just basic science where you can apply it. Yeah. And that can be important, especially if you're working with people that don't have that information. So things like returning residues to a field instead of bringing them all in one place. And the easy way to return the residues is not carry the residues out to the field, which is a lot of work to ask somebody to do if they're not harvesting a crop. But if they're going to burn it, at least take the ashes, keep them dry, and spread them. And that's very easy to do. And so that's a little insight that, oh, those ashes are really worth it, especially on acid soil. So that with the pH meters, I don't know if you looked at the first slide. I don't know if I can get back to the first slide or not. Probably not. It's going to be hard. But I had a flip chart, which I bought there, by the way. And in that flip chart, if you read that, I don't know if you can read this. This is not my handwriting, that's Boney's handwriting. We measured these in the field. So it was trying to make that point that, so their board, they brought me some well water, and the EC was 90, and the EC near the house was 150, and the EC in the farthest field where they were having trouble was 60. And of the ashes, it was 1,350. And we kind of, I let them read the numbers. They knew how to do numbers. They'd all been through the elementary school at least. And so they understood numbers. It wasn't we could talk about data. They understood that. And we also measured pH, and you can see that the ashes had a pH of almost 10, and then the fields near the house had a pH over 7. This is typical in almost every village. And yet this is something that really wasn't investigated until, the last couple of decades. This is pretty well known all over Africa. This is true in other sort of peasant societies. there's this one-way traffic of nutrients. So that's a really important insight if they can start learning to bring things back to the, to the field. Yeah,
For the farmer that had flintite, did he have any hope? And what were your suggestions?
for the farmer that had,
Flintite?
oh, gosh, yeah, that was the land he had. It would be nice if he had some better land. That whole village was very poor. That area was like that. Those are really poor soils. I would put them in trees. And do some agroforestry on those. You can get trees to grow on them. You might have to break through that flintite a little bit, depending on how bad it is. And you probably want to seed it with some phosphorus in the trees. But again, yeah, the only thing they could afford is, a bag of phosphorus is very phosphorus, right? I mean, our farmers are complaining about phosphorus too. The price has really gone up, especially with the war situation and all that. But we do have, we can cycle it, and their urine's a bit lower in phosphorus than our urine, but it's still same thing for their animal manure. That can be, used, but those are tough, yeah. Most of the villages I worked with didn't have that problem, and they were actually, had pretty decent resources.
Great presentation. That's impactful, really. I mean, little things can help. As a village boy, I have experience of using animals plowing, mobile plow, as you showed,
Yeah.
and even hose, small hose.
But your hoe was at the right angle, right? I've never seen a straight hoe like that.
But I appreciate it.
Yeah.
One thing that I was going to ask, if you gathered somehow inheritance sort of culture, inheritance laws that sometimes prevent the land gets divided between the family members.
Yeah.
If there's small parcels, so using modern equipment sometimes faces problem. In my village that I grew up in Northwest Iran, I mean, they use currently stationary combines. They harvest the wheat and bring feed into
Sure.
it. So they cannot use the combine, mobile. combine.
Yeah, so these, you saw the landscape of the fields. They're all small fields. So the teacher was actually very informative. I was trying to get an idea of how long they've been doing agriculture like they are. So 50, 60 years ago, they were doing much more shifting cultivation, which is why these soils are still pretty good. So when this populations were lower, they had a very sustainable way of using that agroforestry, letting the land rest for about 20 years. It takes quite a while to recover. And as population grows, pretty soon you find you can't do that anymore. And so that it's been a few generations that they've been using land continuously. There's no question that the future for societies like that, where the majority of people are living in that kind of condition, is not in agriculture. Agriculture is the engine for the economy, but they're going to have to get urban jobs and industrial jobs because you'll never make a middle-class living off of 3 acres of land, pretty much no matter what you do. I mean, you can imagine a few people doing that, but not the whole population. Yeah. And that's a hard sell in the development circles. Yeah.
I
Yes.
think we better, we're right on minute past
Okay.
one.
Well,
I
I'm
think
going to
we
catch that last question, but everybody, you can go if you got someplace you have to go, if there's a class coming in, but yeah. You're from the south?
From Uganda,
From
based in Kampala.
Kampala, yeah.
I'm Atlanta Roads, that takes place in the northern part of Uganda. Again, which has a part about it. One thing I also have to say is that the national agricultural research institutions are way not talking as they are supposed to do. Given issues, just as we've seen, they're not supposed to do what they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And then the other issue about our people more is mindset. The mindset is really not good. Like just like we see the basic practices of say getting residues and not taking them back to the fields. I think it's all about mindset. Our mindset is really poor. We know that these residues have nutrients and we're supposed to leave them in the field, but to get this and tell the farmer this is right, should not get distressed out of the field. It will take time for the farmer to
Yeah.
apply because of mindset change. It's really a big problem we have. However, I appreciate the presentation.
Well, I would like to say that the mindset, I think, of the villages that I was working with was really very open to change. And that's not true everywhere. I've worked in Western Uganda, in Mbara. In the West, where the Toki is the main crop, you know, a very different situation. There, maybe the mindset was more, but these people were really interested in trying to do things differently. I was very impressed with these villagers. But you're right about the narrow, and the extension is non-existent. I mean, they have an extension system, and they never get out to the villages, but that's largely they aren't funded, right? There's no money for petrol for the fuel or no motorcycle or no, you know, so they sit around the office and, you know, yeah, right. And it's not just Uganda. Don't feel bad. You'll find the same thing in, you know, Tanzania and most other countries in Africa as well. A little different in Rwanda. I was going to say Rwanda, but they're a little bit different again. Rwanda is pretty unique. Have you ever been to Rwanda?
I've not, but I've heard about it. It's actually very unique.
Yeah, it's quite, you wonder, really. Right.
Anyway, let's
Yeah,
get
thank
ready
you so
for
much. Okay.